Welcome to the end of the video, and I'm saying that only because the suspension is already complete. But if you want to know how we got here, watch the next few minutes and I'll do my best to explain what I did to build a custom 4-link suspension system on a square body Chevy. I'm glad we stopped the teardown right here because I left the fuel tanks in, I left the drivetrain in, and what I can do now is install the rear axle. That way I know that I maintain my wheelbase. We are going to be running a 4-link rear suspension with coilovers, and also we're going to triangulate the upper control arms. The reason people triangulate the upper control arms is so we don't have to run a track bar or panhard bar in order to center the axle underneath the frame. By leaving the fuel tanks in, I'm going to be able to set up my upper and lower control arms and make sure that I'm not interfering with the fuel tanks. Initially, I was going to strip this frame down to nothing and then build my suspension from there, but I'm glad I slept on it and thought about it. I might as well install those control arms now. That way I know exactly where to put them and it's not going to interfere with these tanks, and everything will go back together when I'm finished buffing and welding and painting. Everything will go back together without interfering with each other. My first round of cleaning on the axle is done. I kind of colored here. This is where I want to pass a weld, and of course I'm going to pass a weld on here. Right here I just traced it. I don't believe I'm going to have to weld up here. I know a lot of people do, but it's really not necessary. This is not a rock bouncer. I'm not going to be doing that type of activity. I don't need to fill that in with weld. I am going to weld here. That's a much smaller weld. That's already very tight fitting. So good job on Barnes to make this such a well-fitting truss. And of course I'm going to weld over here. Need to do a little bit of cleaning, more cleaning. I only did a first round cleaning is what I'm calling it. I only hit it with a wire wheel on the grinder right there. Now let's look and see what I've done on the back side. Actually, this is the front side, isn't it? The other side is the back side. Like the other side, I'm gonna pass a weld here, nothing there. That's not necessary for me. And then on the side here and across the top, that's a very small gap. That'll be easy for me to fill in with weld. I'm not gonna weld here, not necessary. Right here, small gap, I'm gonna weld that up, and of course, around the tube here. I'm gonna get back to cleaning. I'm gonna put a 40 grit and then maybe an 80 grit on the angle grinder and clean all these places that I have marked up. And then I'm gonna get to welding. Okay, the axle is located underneath the frame, and I'm getting ready to weld on the first lower control arm mount. It's located 3 inches from the flange on the wheel mounting surface. And then underneath, see, I have a level under here, making sure that it's level underneath. So I'm going to tack it on and make sure that it looks good. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I say making sure a lot because it's that old phrase, measure twice, cut once. So I'm going to measure 5 or 6 times before I weld. So let's get to it. I'm mocking this up right here to give you all a better view of what I did for the lower control arm mount and the upper control arm mount. Now the lower control arm mount is mounted on the frame at an angle because the lower control arm mounts that are welded onto the axle are kicked in at 10 degrees. So these aren't straight on the frame. They're kicked out a little bit to match that angle coming off of the axle. Initially, I thought I could take the upper control arm mount and weld it directly onto here. That would have been very simple. Just weld it on here and be done with it. But the 4-link calculator wanted it up a little bit, and also it fit in the frame better with it raised up 1 inch. So I went over to Home Depot. I got a 1" by 1/4" flat bar, and I welded it on here like such. And then it sits on here like such. And now you can see how I got these two mounted together. It's all going to be welded in and boxed in after I install the frame boxing kit that I purchased from DIY 4x4. They make a fully boxed kit for the square body Chevys. It says that it's not easy to install and I have to do a lot of modification to the kit to get it to fit, but at least it gives me a starting point. Before we get started, I'm just going to say that the suspension was designed and built at ride height with a 35" tire. This is a 12" king coilover, 2.5" diameter. So the ride height is right at 25 inches. From eyelet to eyelet, it's right at 25 inches. And I trick. Now, the rear suspension is pretty much completed. Everything is where it needs to be. Some things are permanently welded in, some things are not permanently welded in. So this is how I started the suspension. I located the rear axle where it needs to be. After I located the rear axle where it needed to be, I picked a spot in the frame where I wanted to mount the control arms. Now, what's really tricky about where these control arm mounts are located is that the frame is not the same size on each side. On the passenger side, the frame is about 6 1/8. On the driver's side, the frame is about 7 1/8. 7 1/8. Now, look inside the frame. Inside the frame here, we can see that the bracket is nearly up against the frame. On the driver's side, there's a large gap. Go over the top. On the driver's side, there's a large gap because the frame thins up. I don't know exactly why it did that. See, it's fat here, it starts to thin up here, it's thin, and then it fattens up again behind that bracket. So I'm just gonna have more work to do once I put in the frame boxing kit. I'm going to have to just brace everything and box everything in together right here. Looking at the system and looking at where the control arms are mounted, it looks like the upper control arms are shorter than the lower control arms, but they're actually not. They're actually the exact same length control arms. The reason they look like they're a different length is because, see right here, it looks like they're different lengths. But that's because on the axle side, you can see that the mounting location is different. We're forward. So what you see here, the mounting difference there, is displayed over here on the frame side. But the upper and lower control arms are actually the exact same length. Roughly 48 3/8. 48 3/8. The upper and lower control arms are roughly 48 3/8 inches long. Our rear forelink is built with common suspension techniques that's used in off-road, on-road, just used basically by everyone. It's techniques that everyone uses to ensure that they have a decent ride quality and decent performance. And our lower control arm is less than 10 degrees. It's about 6.5, 7 degrees on our lower control arm. Our upper control arms are level. Both of them are level. I did run the numbers in the forelink calculator, and I'm looking at about 97% anti-squat. Most people want to run about 100%. 100% I think is target, but it depends on what you're doing. This being a predominantly pavement queen,
I'd say if you see this truck in the mud or in the rocks, call the cops, because it ain't me, and so it's stolen. Help. So we're looking at about 97% anti-squat. Now moving over to the coilover mounts, I may have to change this. These coilovers are the coilovers that's actually designed and built for the front of the truck. Filthy Motorsports designed these to work in the front of this truck with the big block engine that we're going to be putting in it. So the valving in here is designed for the front. I used them to mock up the back, and I forgot that my rear coilovers are going to have a piggyback. My rear coilovers are going to have a piggyback coilover reservoir. So that reservoir is, this adjustment is probably going to hit right here. I can avoid that by just mounting the piggyback the way this is mounted, with the piggyback reservoir in the front and my adjustment knob here in the front. And there's nothing wrong with that. Ben at Filthy Motorsports says there's nothing wrong with that. It's just more aesthetically pleasing if you have the piggyback reservoir on the backside. That's why most of the time you see the piggyback reservoir on the backside, not on the front side. So I might have to change this. And also you can see that it's mounted really far down. It's really mounted low, and if you were going off-road, most definitely do not mount your coilover like this. You'd want it level or straight, or more of an angle up. Like this, being as though this is a pavement queen, not going off-road, I mounted it like this so I can have a 12-inch coilover. I can still get that travel, and I didn't want to have to go into the bed. I don't want to have to cut into my bed and lose cargo area in the bed of my truck. That's why I did it like this.
The next video is going to start with me chopping up the Dana 60 and installing the low profile truss that goes on the Super Duty axles. That is from Barnes 4-wheel drive. I use a lot of Barnes stuff just because of the price, and they ship quickly. I don't have any type of affiliation with them. I just use a lot of their stuff because it's good quality, they ship quickly, and it's affordable. But anyhow, I'm going to be installing that Dana 60 truss. From there, I'm going to start installing the front 3-link suspension system. I won't be able to do a 4-link on the front because of course the engine's in the way, and God knows what else is going to be in the way. Probably exhaust headers, they're probably going to be in the way. And don't forget that this truck is getting an 8.1 liter Vortec engine with the Allison transmission and the transfer case that's with it. I keep forgetting what transfer case it is. It's new to me. I haven't really used that transfer case. I think it's a 263 electric shift transfer case. I want to use that because I just want to put buttons. I don't want to have to buy cables and install linkage like I had to do on my son's truck, Frankie. Anyway, I hope you subscribe. That way you can come back and see how we do this. I like to see you guys asking questions in the comments. It's more interactive for me. It's more fun for me if you guys are posting in the comments asking questions, and sometimes you guys point out things that I forgot. So thank you for doing that, and I'll see you in the next video.